Welcome to the Inspired Hygiene podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Wall. I'm an RDH and founder of Inspired Hygiene. For over 20 years, we've had the unique opportunity to see what really happens inside thousands of dental hygiene ops and what it takes to create transformational change that impacts the lives of patients, practice owners, and teams. Each season, we'll focus on one powerful topic, breaking it down with practical strategies, real stories, and tools you can use right away. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Inspired Hygiene podcast. So for this season, we have really been focusing on where we see teams really want to focus and really dive deeper into these different areas of innovation in order to thrive in 2026 and going forward. And so today, I'm super excited to have two experts on with me. This is going to be awesome. I've invited both of them to really talk through maybe an area that isn't always the fun part of dentistry, but it touches every part of the practice, and that is insurance documentation and billing. And they are absolutely critical to having a healthy, thriving practice. Staying compliant and really maximizing the relationships that you're in with insurance or that you're not in, either way, and helping your patients maximize that as well. So I invited Theresa Duncan from Odyssey Management and Estella Vargas from Remote Sourcing to join me. And together they bring decades of experience helping practices stay compliant, efficient, profitable. And so Estella, tell us a little bit about remote sourcing, and really what you all do. I know you're also a national speaker, you're a published author. So what are the topics that you typically tackle?
Yeah, one little thing we didn't touch on, which actually helps with our audience, is I'm actually a hygienist as well.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, for over a decade. And I practiced with many different specialties before moving over to the insurance side. So I've been there. I've even been dumpster diving, for things that go missing. So remote sourcing, our three main core services are insurance billing, patient billing, and insurance verification. We do dabble a little bit in credentialing, negotiations, but that's for our existing clients. It's a benefit for them.
Awesome. And you speak on those topics as well. And
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. And Theresa Duncan, you and I go way back. You have been in the industry as an industry expert for over 20 years, and you were also in the practice. You still keep your hands in actively with billing and insurance in a practice, and you teach all over the country. You have a billing mastermind group. I'm probably not saying all that right, but tell us about Odyssey Management and everything that you do for our industry and our colleagues.
So you can find me usually speaking on the road all the time, slowing down a little bit because I really found that my membership called Dental Revenue Network is become a passion of mine, where I'm helping billers, RCM people, professionals really take it to the next level. There's so much to learn. It changes a lot nowadays. So I write, I have two podcasts. My one podcast, nobody told me that. Rachel, you've been on before. Estella's been on. Yeah. It really is for the manager who's looking to never be surprised by information. Mm-hmm. They want to know everything. And that's really why I feel like I love speaking so much, because the people sitting in my audience are looking for that nugget. They're not going to get just looking around on the net. So it's been fun. It's been fun collaborating with other people who've been in the industry a while. I mean, Rachel, you and I have seen a lot of changes. Estella has been in the industry, but she's still seeing a lot of changes. And with insurance, there's been a ton of adjustments we've had to make as billing professionals. That's been, I think, very challenging for not just us, but clinicians too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be sure and link to your podcast. Nobody Told Me That. That's the one you're speaking of, specific for managers. And then also you have a fantastic book that we share with a lot of our clients, which is Moving Your Patients to Yes. So about having conversations around insurance and financials and things like that. So that's a really great resource too. So we'll be sure and link to that. And we'll link to your business as well, Estella. And okay, so you thank you for that kind of lead in. That's really my first question, is in this changing landscape, you know, there are so many things that are necessary to keep up with in the insurance documentation and billing arena. And let's start with some of the piece that I would say clinicians and business managers are probably the most familiar with, which are the CBT codes.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see any changes coming in 2026 and beyond that dental teams need to be aware of and prepare for, especially around documentation, coding accuracy? Like what are you two seeing kind of come around the bend that we need to be aware of?
Well, let me just speak to what I see individuals needing to pay attention to. So as the CDT code has evolved, we have 60 changes for 26. That's it's a ton.
Wow.
And I mean, how on earth our office is supposed to keep up with this? Some are minor, some are not so minor at all. And some are going to be completely misconstrued. I mean, Estella and I have a chat going on about that right now. What I have seen actually with the ADA is they have a big attempt to keep up with technology, which is really hard, new technology, new products and all of that. And sometimes, and what I have seen recently is that the codes don't necessarily describe to the best extent. So really it's on us clinicians to do that gap analysis. What describes it the best? And then you have to go with that. You can't just make up your own codes. And unfortunately, we have the 999 codes as a stopgap, which really doesn't help. So I think that you're seeing a lot more changes, but that also means there's a lot more room for error if the clinicians aren't paying attention to the definitions and they're just kind of going with the old codes and not staying updated. So, and Estella has been going to the code maintenance committee meetings too with me. I'm glad people are starting to go with me because it's kind of lonely for a while. So, yeah, she's been having fun there.
Okay, so I want to just clarify what you said or just kind of break it down for the clinicians. Is what I think what you're speaking of is all of the new products and technologies. So adjunctive services, for example, right, that a hygienist might use to enhance scaling and root planing. There aren't specific codes for every one of those products. And so I think what you're saying is the clinicians need to really read the definitions and determine like, okay, this most accurately describes this product that I just placed or this service that I just provided. And then you've got to back it up.
Correct.
So,
and the codes are not product specific. They're very,
right.
very stern on that. And so it's really up to you to look at the ingredients to see, is this super fluoride? Well, we already have a fluoride code, or is this actually a new way of treating the disease or the caries? And this is where I, as a non-clinical person, I have to lean on clinical people for more explanations. And honestly, Estella does a great job with this in her writing because she's got that clinical information and the research mind. So she could probably speak to some of the differences in the codes and how the products have really influenced the way they're used.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that, Estella. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. Actually, with the CET committee, they're very focused on procedural steps to complete any kind of treatment that we're doing on the patients. That's why Theresa was mentioning that they don't focus so much on the product, but on the procedure itself. If the new treatment that the hygienist or the doctor is providing is procedurally different from an existing code, that would be the time that we bring in the adjunctive codes, the 999 codes, to describe that it needs to be described clearly in the clinical notes. There is increased payer scrutiny, especially for all of the carriers, for the evidence. Like you said, they have to back it up with their clinical notes. And we're completely moved away from the narrative. Before we could, and even when I was taught in hygiene school, we write down, review medical history, any new updates, and then we just jump right into what we're doing with the patient, describe it in detail, OHI, next visit. But what the carriers want to see is structured clinical notes. They want to see either in the SOAP note format, which is, are we familiar with SOAP note? Have we talked about that in the podcast before?
We have not talked about that in the podcast, so feel free to dive into that.
All right. So the SOAP note, it's a standardized format that's used in medicine regularly. I mean, it's across the board in the medical field. It hasn't moved over yet to dental, but I'm kind of educating on it and trying to get it to be a standard. It's an acronym. So S stands for subjective. That would be the patient's chief complaint, anything that they're describing to you. The O is for objective information. That's when we're recording the period chart, the x-rays, any kind of documentation that we're doing. Like even when we're charting existing decay or anything in the treatment, not for the treatment planning, but like existing treatment that needs to be done. A is for assessment. This is the part where the doctor uses all of the subjective and objective information to come up with an assessment plan, what they're seeing, what the differential diagnosis may be, and then the plan. This is the actual treatment plan that is presented to the patient and the next steps. They want to see, and when I say they, I mean the carriers and their automated ways of adjudicating claims. So the AI basically wants to see your notes be in that format. If the SOAP note format is too complicated to memorize, to, kind of implement, we can start adjusting our existing note and then just adding key details on there on what we need. I'm sure we've talked about the start time and end time, anesthesia that was used, the staging and grading, which is missing from so many clinical notes. Yeah. And it's been around since 2017. My goodness. Yeah. I mean, I'll get off that soapbox. But yeah, there's a lot of yeah. There's a lot of scrutiny from the payers that the documentation is not backing up the code. So we're seeing an increase in denial, and there's an increase in those requirements because there's so many, I would say, bad apples out there trying to find the gray areas, trying to make up their own codes that forces the payers to then request more and more documentation just to pay for something that before, if we just sent bite wings and a period chart, it was sufficient. That's no longer the case.
Can I bring up one other piece on that? So she's talking about the carriers wanting really clear notes. And so a lot of times doctors will give me pushback, like, why am I doing all this work for the carriers? But I want us to think about it differently. Those notes are really great to protect you in case of malpractice and against a state board. So hygienists, anybody with a license that they have to protect. So I don't want you to think of, oh my gosh, I have to do this and do this just because of the insurance. If those notes are going to satisfy the carrier, then you should be fine in a judge and jury situation, which is really what I'm concerned with as an office manager. I'm protecting the practice. So don't push back on, all this extra work. Actually look at it as, okay, you know what? If that's what they want, it probably matches up with state board, because what they're asking for has to match up with existing standard of care. And that's what, so I say, let's just protect ourselves. I'm not a fan of defensive medicine, but you know what? Offensive medicine is pretty good. Offensive clinical notes is pretty good.
Yeah. And it's really what we should be doing anyway. So yes. We hear that sometimes is, what is all this extra work? It's like, okay, oral cancer screening, head and neck is what you should be doing anyway. A complete periodontal charting, recording all the 6 criteria. That's what we should be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's extra because in our industry, because there's very little oversight outside of insurance companies or the state board or a patient filing a complaint, there's no oversight in dentistry. And so for independent practice, like in a DSO, it's a little different. Like there's more attention to compliance, I think, in that arena. But we've been able to be complacent in many instances. And yes. So this increased scrutiny is really just bringing us to where we need to be anyway. And we can be ticked off about it, or we can just say, hey, it's 2025, right? Soon to be 2026. And this is this is the standard of care. This is the standard of documentation. And so a couple things that you brought up were, the SOAP note. I think really we provide our clients, and I want to look at this through that lens with a hygiene note template. And I believe it satisfies all of those pieces, but do we have it in an order, right? That someone could look at it and say, yes, this is a SOAP note, even though it doesn't say, subjective, objective. The other thing I want to kind of remind folks too of is when you said objective is the facts, right? The facts are this patient has disease, whether it's periodontal disease or it's caries. They have disease, and this is the differential diagnosis, which must be in that clinical note. And this is the plan based on what we're seeing there. So those are really, really critical pieces to have in there. And yes, staging and grading. It still surprises me too. Like I'm going to give everybody 2018, right? Because it was kind of hinted at in 2017 and then fully released in 2018, but that's 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time for it not to be adopted, I would say, in probably 50% of practices.
Yeah. It's shocking when you do a chart audit. Estella and I both look at a lot of charts. Like, it's wild. The perio charting is not complete. And if it's even there, and if it's even yearly, and even for perio patients, that have had osteosurgery, like, they're still not regular charting. So yeah, you're right. We've been complacent, and it is catching up to us now for sure.
Yeah. We'll talk about
if we're working. Yeah, if we're working with a doctor that does any kind of grafting, we need mucogingival junction measurements as well. We need recession. It's necessary and mandatory because that will determine the prognosis of the treatment. And insurance looks at that. They have to look at every detail of the perio chart. It's not just bleeding points. I mean, how many perio charts do we see that don't even have bleeding points? If there's no bleeding points, do we have active infection? We might have pocketing with no active infection. That's what the carriers are seeing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, you guys are speaking my language, because we tell clients that all the time, is that if you submit something and there's no bleeding there, then the carrier just thinks, well, they don't have active infection, so why are you doing scaling and root planing?
Right.
We have seen a direct correlation between when we work with clients and we work with the hygienist on this is the diagnostic data that must be completed before we recommend and move into periodontal therapy. They are seeing, I'm going to use, I know this isn't true for every client, but for several that are coming to mind right now, no denials, no scaling root planing denials.
That's great. That's great. And also with the diagnostic tools you're submitting, if you are using the AI imaging, but the charts if the perio charts are super easy to read, I mean, they are being scanned. They do get to be seen by a human if it's what we call an adverse decision, a denial. Okay. But in order for it to be approved, it's being scanned. So let's make it as easy for whatever machine robot at the time is scanning it, right? So, and that's why AI images, the radiographs, have been, to me, a game changer. I definitely have seen a huge increase, a decrease in appeals in the offices that are using it correctly and regularly submitting it. So, and I think, Estella, you're probably seeing the same thing.
Absolutely, yes. Especially with those bone level measurements. And it also gives you a percentage, which helps you stage and grade. It makes it easier.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to do another episode in this season on AI and technology integration that teams really need to dig deeper into going forward. So this is a perfect just lead into that. So this also brings up the conversation of team calibration. So we see very often a disconnect between the hygienist and admin team. So I'll give an example. Last week, I was with one of our coaches. We were working in a practice, and they have an insurance coordinator, and she brought up the fact that, hey, remember, like, your perio charting documentation is not just for you, hygienists. It is for this patient, and it's for everything else that this patient experiences in this practice. So her example was, just like you said, Estella, like, this patient needs an implant. The insurance company is asking for a perio chart, and then they go in there and there's not one in the last 3 years. That's not only a problem from a standard of care standpoint. It's not only a problem from the patient care standpoint, but it's a problem from this patient getting a benefit for any of the other treatment that they do. So what's one thing that you see where clinical and admin can do better to understand each other, improve claim outcomes?
This is something I speak about all the time. And I love that you use the word calibration, because that's what I use constantly. It's necessary and required. In the morning huddle, in a weekly meeting, I always recommend grabbing, for the admin team, to grab a denied claim, present the information that was available, and then talk about why this claim was denied. Because the admin team knows why. And when the clinical team looks at that documentation and they pair things together, they're going to be able to put 2 and 2 together and realize what's going on. More importantly, for the providers to educate the entire team on why they do what they do, how they diagnose. The doctors, sometimes it gets overwhelming to educate and teach after you've been talking to patients all day, or just to start off the day like that. I understand. But for them to understand how you treatment plan, how you come up with that crown diagnosis because of your 20 years of experience. You know, if you don't crown it, it's going to end up fractured, whatever the reason may be. Explain that to the team. Let them understand and know, because in the future, when they see a similar scenario, they're already going to know how the doctor's going to approach that. We need to calibrate regularly. It needs to be discussed, especially for complicated cases.
Yeah. And we call that case review. So I would say that's an area of innovation, is to get committed to doing these case reviews at least monthly. And you could bring in a hygiene patient and a dental patient and get everybody calibrated on why this patient was diagnosed this way. When we work with practices, we ask that the entire team go through the same foundational learning, which is our perio protocol boot camp. And a lot of times, the business team and sometimes even assistants will say, well, why do I have to do this? This doesn't apply to me. It absolutely does, right? They're getting the context. While they might not be performing the service, they're getting that context of why this patient is moving from one type of treatment to the next. And so they can understand the thought process and then what documentation needs to be there.
One point about the calibration piece. And so I'll just play the good and the bad of the admin side here, because I got two hygienists here I'm talking to. So there's two things I want to bring up for the hygienists that are listening. When you have an admin person who's trying to tell you how to treat a patient, keep in mind that is completely inappropriate. There is no reason. And I would, as an office manager, I would back you up all day, every day. There is no reason for any dental manager to an admin team to tell any clinician how they're supposed to do things. I am concerned with how to get it paid, not how you do it. But what I hear often is that these benefit guidelines become clinical guidelines in the mind of the admin. And if they're berated enough, it becomes that way for clinical. And that's really unfortunate. And that's not what you went to school for. I don't know the ins and outs. Sometimes I've been doing this for close to 30 years. I'll listen to a perio clinical class and I'll learn something brand new. And I've been coding for it for how long? I don't know what you know. Now, on the other side, what I need to get across to my hygiene friends and assistant friends is that the diagnostic data that you give me has to be diagnostically clear. And so I can't use open bite radiographs. I can't, like, all of this stuff. So please look at that. If one of your people is coming in and saying these radiographs, like, can you just redo them? We're not doing that because we want to get you upset. Like, we need them. And also keep in mind, a radiograph is considered to be a completed procedure if it is of diagnostic quality and if it's been read. So if it's not of diagnostic quality, you actually charge the patient for a procedure you did not deliver. And this is what we're seeing when we have audits. They have every right to ask for payment back for every radiograph you took that is not of diagnostic quality. And that's in or out of network. And one of the largest I saw was United Concordia years ago took $300,000 from a patient, from an office, a Pennsylvania office, because all of their PAs, they had billed for PAs. They were bad diagnostic quality for some of them, but all of them had nothing indicating that they had been reviewed. Well, that's part of the procedure. So I teach radiographs required due to, because there's the prescription. And I know this is a bigger conversation, but radiographs are a prescribed procedure. Then the last part of that note is radiographs reviewed. Like, two simple things are going to save you. And in a matter of going to court, you need to show, yeah, we took the x-rays. Well, what did the x-rays say? Oh, well, we created a treatment plan. That's not enough. Radiographs reviewed. Treatment plan created, discussed with the patient. And Estella and I are laughing and smiling on this because we get really heated about this. We can really go crazy talking about this together, because I cannot get your claims paid if the documentation is not clear. And so I say in my classes, documentation drives revenue. Revenue is clinically driven. There's no way around that. Revenue is clinically driven. And so when you look at the connection between revenue cycle and the clinical, what goes on in the back, it's so intertwined, even though we have front, back. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. One can't operate without the other. So, revenue, clinical drives revenue. I mean, that's kind of an obvious statement, but to your point is it's not just what patients pay. It's if you're depending on a benefit to come in, it's what's getting paid. It's not what's getting billed out.
Right. Right. So documentation drives your revenue. That's been my mantra, so and it's not really if you're an admin listening to this, don't use it as a hammer. It's not meant to be a hammer. It's meant to be, this is why, to Estella's point, and your audits bring up the case review. If this x-ray had been this much clearer, this would have been an easier buildup to get covered. We can't wave a magic wand, Estella, right? We can't get the buildups covered. We can't.
Yeah. But there's 3 things I do want to touch on the x-rays. If they were Achilles heels and you were 3-legged, it would be these. Foreshortening makes it look like the patient has more bone than they actually do. Overlapping prevents the AI or a clinical reviewer to see the horizontal bone loss, because that's where they measure from. It's from where the quarter athlete begins. Even if it's an infrabony pocket, that's where they begin to measure. So we need to write in our clinical notes when we have infrabony pockets. And finally, for any kind of restorative procedure, we need to see the apices of the roots, because the insurance company needs to make sure that there is no pathology going on at the apices, because if there is, then the prognosis isn't good. And if there is something going on, you need a note or a referral or something from endo. So those 3 things in x-ray errors can cause tons and tons of denials.
That's super helpful and actionable. So everybody take a look at your x-rays, do a chart audit, grab 20 charts. And I would say just kind of let the team know, hey, we're going to do a chart audit because we all need to get better at this. And what percentage of those bite wings are of diagnostic quality? You can see the bone level, you can see between the teeth, you can accurately assess the amount of bone level. And we do that as well. I know you guys do a lot of chart audits. We do as well. We do that for our clients. And I think it's very helpful to have a third party do that, because we don't have that bias towards, we don't want to tell Janie that her x-rays aren't good because, she's getting ready to retire in, 6 months. And it's like, yeah, that could be 6 months of no diagnostic x-rays. And that's not helpful for anyone. I want to
Rachel, I'm sorry, real quick, because of this. I just want to make sure that we know that it doesn't mean you have to be perfect every time. There are patients you cannot take an x-ray on for whatever reason. That just put it in the notes. Just put it in the notes. This is the best radiograph we could obtain. And every doctor that does the review, if it's going to denial, they'll see that. They're doctors. They'll get that.
Yeah. We teach to vertical bite wings as much as possible. And again, same thing. There's going to be some patients that have that mandibular tori or whatever it is, and just document that. I think documentation, like you said, that's the key. And that's what we've been preaching too. You also mentioned, I want to touch on this, don't use it as a hammer, because we do hear that from time to time. Is the hygienist will recommend something and they'll bring up the treatment plan, and the treatment coordinator or the office manager says, yeah, you can't do that. That needs to be a prophy. And that's not their place to do that.
No, that is wrong.
Right. That is wrong. And hygienist, have you fully documented the extent of the disease, right? We always have to look at what have we documented. And if we know without a shadow of a doubt that this patient has periodontal disease, that they need some type of therapy, we need to stand our ground and go to the clinical leader as well and say, we've got to get calibrated because this is what this patient needs. And I will tell you that seems like you're trying to do something good to reduce the friction around these claims. But that mindset becomes so ingrained in a team that even when they are out of network and they're completely fee for service, those mindsets are really hard to change. We see it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I would say is it is helpful if you bring a claim that's getting denied, you're seeing repeated problems that are resulting in a denial for scaling root planning, let's say, it is helpful to bring it to the team when you have some coaching to give them and a solution. Where it is not helpful, and we've seen this happen too, is that every time that the insurance coordinator gets a denial, they just ping the hygienist, they send it to their email, but they don't tell them why or how to solve the problem. And so it becomes the hygienist starts to question their clinical judgment because it makes them feel like I'm doing something wrong because these are all getting denied. It must not be necessary. And that is almost never the case. It's just because the documentation isn't complete.
Yeah. And I'm sorry on behalf of my admin people that are doing that. And I think it's appropriate. Like you said, there needs to be a talk from the clinical leader. I'm going to stay in my lane with billing guidelines. You stay in your lane with clinical guidelines. If they don't meet, then that's on me to have that conversation with the patient financially. And that I don't see how that is optional. I don't see how we can even get around like that. That's a hard and fast rule. Like, I don't want a hygienist looking over my shoulder. Well, maybe Estella, but looking over my shoulder and telling me how to bill. Like, I would be like, what are you doing? Like, you don't know what I need. So why is it appropriate for me to look over, Rachel, what you're doing? That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And I would say get your book because it will help you have some of those conversations with patients. Okay. So another big shift that we're seeing, and I know y'all are seeing it too, is with independent practices changing their insurance participation. And we're seeing it very frequently with the practices that we work with, that they are systematically going out of network. And then I just encountered where one team went out of network with the last plan that they had. And at the same time, they also came completely fee for service, meaning that they don't accept assignment of benefit. So that is a huge jump for a team and for patients. And I'm not saying it's not necessary or appropriate, but there's a lot of communication that needs to happen around that. So are you seeing the same thing? And when a practice decides to discontinue being in network, what are some of the biggest communication and administrative challenges that they should expect and just be prepared for?
So on my strategy calls with doctors, I'm not full service consulting anymore, but I'll do strategy calls and we'll go over, why. My first question is always, why do you want to go out of network? And if it's emotional, that's a different conversation. They're not quite ready. I need to know that they actually are aware of the financial impact, or they're ready to look at the financial impact of going out of network. So the hygiene shortage has caused this conversation to come up. The increase in complexity of insurance management, including lease networks. Lease networks have really burnt out a lot of offices. And rather than trying to even untangle themselves from that, they just say, forget it, we're going out of network. So I need to ask the offices, the doctor specifically, is your team behind you? Because if your team is not ready to go out of network, it's a bad scene. We've seen that go bad so many times. And are you doing this because you are looking for something different in your practice? Because you have to be different. You cannot do the same thing and then go out of network. It's a totally different concept. Conversations are different and all of it. And you are going to be, what do we need to look out for? You got to look out for the fact that you're going to lose patients and it's going to stink, but you will attract new patients or they'll come back. People change plans all the time. Going completely out of network, like what you're saying, fee for service, because out of network is when you take assignment of benefits and you'll still collect insurance amounts. Fee for service completely, that's almost like to go from heavy to fee for service is, if you're a risky person, go for it. But I see most offices doing the interim step and then moving on. You need to have your team on board. The doctor has to be personable. If you don't have that, and this is hard to say to a doctor, if you don't have that warm and fuzzy personality that people want to come and spend money with you, that's a harder conversation, right? Then you can't say what we used to say 10 years ago, where insurance is still going to cover your cleanings 100% and nothing's changed. It's just, maybe $10, $15. What we're seeing in the industry is huge differences in fees between out of network and in network. So what used to be covered at 100%, routinely we'll see anywhere from $50 to $100 out of pocket for that appointment, times 2 for something that they used to get for free. So they need to really love you in order to do that. That's just the consumer. That's American consumer. So getting the treatment plan estimations correct is hard. You actually, I think, work harder at that when you're out of network than you are in network. And you have to be, as one dentist said in a class I was in, he said, you have to be sweet again. and when you're on a hamster wheel, you forget to be sweet. And I thought that was hilarious and true. So yeah, Estella, what are you seeing?
Yes, same issue. And a lot of it with our clients that abruptly go out of network or they fail to do something administratively and they get dropped from the network. The False Claims Act actually comes into effect where we treatment planned something, we presented it to the patient, and then turns out their claim was processed out of network, and now the admin team is billing them for an unexpected balance that can get the practice in trouble for that. The fee recalibration wasn't done correctly in the practice. So if we decide to go out of network, we now have to update every single treatment plan that was presented with insurance fees. That does not happen, or we're going to honor it for a certain amount of time. These conversations are not happening before we pull that trigger. There needs to be preparation, and the entire team needs to be fully educated on communication and scripts, because the patients are going to, like Theresa mentioned, they're going to ask questions to everyone in the team. But what about this? What about that? Why is my copay now $300 when I never had to pay anything?
Yep. And those are the things that you both teach teams to do, is how to have those conversations and what are the things to do before you're out of network to prepare your patients and prepare your team.
Another unintended consequence I've seen is reduction in team member. So when you're heavy participation, you have lots of teams, all of a sudden you've got one insurance coordinator sitting around with hardly anything to do. That's a struggle for some dentists who have a really great team. And then they're just saying, well, what do I do with this person? There could very well be a reduction in teams.
Yeah, we have absolutely seen that. Or they keep them on staff and then everybody's just kind of trying to look busy. And they're waiting for the rebound, which could take a while. And again, if they're not doing anything different, we have had several clients that, called us, or they were waiting, they were referred to us, and then they were waiting and they made these changes, and now they have room in the hygiene schedule, and now they're kind of primed and ready to, take their hygiene department to the next level. And it's unfortunate that they waited, but I mean, this schedule backlog is a real challenge. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast. We've done a podcast on it, but it is a real challenge. So that is one area of opportunity when they do go out of network. It often opens up some space so they can really get refocused on diagnosis and get these patients into the care that they need. So thank you for shedding a little bit of light on that one. That is a big thing that's happening now. Okay. So before we wrap up, again, we're talking in this season about innovation that's really necessary for teams to thrive in 2026 and going forward. You both work with practices that are trying to, future-proof their systems, avoid getting stuck in old habits. That is so common in dentistry. And again, I feel like a lot of it is because there's no outside oversight. We're not part of a big hospital system that's saying, no, you have to use this Epic software to do your notes now. You don't really have a choice. If you could wave a magic wand and help dental practices shift one mindset about insurance and documentation going forward, what would that be? Estella?
A shift from being reactive to proactive. That is my one and only wish. If we could change this mindset and realize that documentation is not just paperwork, it is the financial lifeline of the practice. It is the hygienist's cash flow, is the hygienist's job security.
Yeah.
This needs to be understood deeply. Dentistry is very reactive. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially dentists. It's not until they get a letter from a carrier or from a lawyer or an insurance company or the board that they're like, well, now we got to start looking at things. Now we need to think about changing things. Don't wait until you're in trouble. Don't wait until you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars back or put your license in jeopardy.
Yeah.
I would change conversations with patients that have benefits through their employer to stop saying things like your carrier denied this, your carrier denied that. Start saying the plan your employer selected. Let's really put the onus on where it is. The real customer in this whole picture is not really the end user, the patient, it's the employer. That's really who the carrier is concerned with. So let's say, I'm surprised your employer selected this plan. This isn't covered. I see this covered on many other plans. Perhaps your employer doesn't realize this. Ask to speak to the HR, offer to help. I can't tell you how many local businesses in my area when I was full-time, we changed their plans. We helped them select better plans all the time. They still call the office to find out like what should they be looking at. And they ask, the manager now, Jean, can you take a look at these two plans? And that's the kind of partnership that's going to keep a patient coming back to you. I do want to wave a magic wand. That's not a great magic wand though, which is please understand that compliance is no longer optional in the insurance industry. We have seen an uptick in audits. We have seen more rules and regulations. We're now seeing a lot of Medicare Advantage plans, which actually come with a ton of rules and regulations. A lot of people don't realize that's compliance is now a part of a regular insurance coordinator's job. We have to make sure we're being compliant with multiple contracts, and we have to know where those contracts are. So I would say, again, don't push back on that. In order to really protect your office and do a good job, compliance, you're now a compliance expert. I mean, that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So to wrap up, I want to just touch on a couple things. So everybody that's listening to this season, as we wrap up the season, in the last episode of the season in the show notes, we're going to have a document that's going to kind of give us some action items to consider for innovation going into next year and beyond. But from this particular episode, I would say SOAP notes. So getting your clinical notes in that format, and it doesn't mean you have to change the template to say SOAP, right? It just means have them in that order and make sure all of those pieces of the SOAP note are covered. Documentation drives revenue, and just really objectively look at your documentation. Like, what are you recording in a perio chart? Are your x-rays of diagnostic quality? Are your operative notes, are they really spelling do you have photos that can back up why this tooth needs a buildup, right? Do those case review meetings, get everybody calibrated, and get, if you need to do an in-service on x-rays, find somebody in your team that's really good at taking high quality x-rays and just say, hey, give everybody a brush up on this. Like, what are some of your tricks and tips? And something that you touched on, Estella, at the very beginning that I want to just circle back to before we go is that you said really providing narratives is an outdated process, that now our note should be complete enough to be the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Correct. It is obsolete. Narratives are considered obsolete.
Yeah.
The only time, a carrier wants to see a narrative is in an appeal letter from a doctor where the doctor is justifying their clinical rationale. That is the only time that would be acceptable.
Okay.
The clinical note is what they're looking for. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I just want to give one last little plug. Theresa Duncan with Odyssey Management and Estella Vargas with remote sourcing. And we're going to link both of your companies there and your podcasts and different resources that you have. Thank you so much. This is we could have done this. You're going to have to just come back. So we'll do this.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inspired Hygiene podcast. We hope you got a ton of value and some things that you can really take away and implement now. So as always, we invite you, if we can help you in any way to optimize your hygiene department, head on over to inspiredhygiene.com. And as always, stay inspired.